A little bit about your book, the title of your book, and why you wrote your book, perhaps if they didn't listen to part one. And listeners, you can go back and listen to part one of this show, of course, after you finish listening to part two. But I know it's backwards, but that's okay, you'll get caught up. All right, tell us a little bit more about your book.
All right, the name of my book is The Fully Seasoned Man's Relationship Recipe. It was released earlier this year, and it's been doing phenomenal, and it's continuing on its climb right now. Like she stated, I was in the Styles Weekly magazine for the city this month.
Woo-hoo.
And you know, it's been going good. So, and it's sparking shows like this, and people are requesting a part 2 and part 3, so it's doing real good.
Wow, and why did you write this book?
I wrote this book for women just to give them more insight, open their eyes to the things that a lot of manipulative men are out here doing, and to hopefully enlighten them so that they can learn how to weed out these type of men and look for the proper person for their lives.
All right, we appreciate you trying to help us. And I like that in the book you use the analogy of cooking with relationships. So relationships and cooking is the analogy that you have going throughout the book. And you mentioned in the book something interesting. So you say you could be in the middle of cooking and realize that you made an error. Maybe you left something out of the recipe, you forgot to put something in, you put too much in or whatever. And you have to decide what to do. So that had me thinking, if we're talking about relationships in an analogy of cooking, in that same scenario, if you're in the middle of a relationship and you figure out things aren't going the way you thought they would go, do you modify your behavior? Do you ask the lady to modify her behavior? Or at what point do you just throw the dish in the trash can and say, I'm going to start over?
That's a good question. The reason I compared it to that where you may be cooking and then you have to modify it. I think about red flags in relationship when I think about that. Like when I say cooking and you may have to take something out, put something in. A lot of people, when they, as you get your life's lessons in relationships, you look back on your old ones and you start, it's always when you look back though. You never see the flags early on.
Hindsight is 20/20, right?
That's right, that's right. And when you look back, you see all these red flags, especially if a woman or a man finds his girl was cheating or a woman finds a man was cheating. When you look back, you can, after it's been done to you, you can see all the red flags where you maybe should have spoke up or something like that. So think about a recipe, like when you're working on it in the middle, you may see you've added too much or you've deleted or you need to put something else in. If you look at a relationship, when you see those red flags, you have to, it's a lot of variables though, so it's not really a direct answer, but you have to decide, is this person worth you modifying it and moving on? Or sometimes do you cut your losses and just scrap it and like you said, I mean, start all over. Also, I know with me, age was a factor. When I was young, I would just scrap it. Even if they was worth it, I would just scrap it because, I mean, I was young, I was moving on. But when you're older, you're not willing to scrap it as easy because there's a lot of variables. A lot of people feel like they don't have a lot of choices. A lot of people may feel like, standards high or low. I mean, there's a lot of variables that go in there. So I don't really have a definite answer, but I would say weigh your variables, your options, pros and cons. A lot of people use that old method. It's elementary, but it still works. I mean, you weigh the pros and cons, and whichever one wins is like you decide, do you modify and move on, or do you start all over? But then sometimes it can be, I say if it's petty or is it a big issue that would make me move on. But at the same time, I've been wrong there too, because if it's petty, it might be petty. But if a lot of petty things pile up, it can become big and you still got to move on. So it's up to you based on your values if you decide to modify and move on, or do you cut your losses and start all over with that recipe.
Wow.